Hello, everyone. This is Admiral Jamie Foggo from the Center for Maritime Strategy of the Navy League of the United States, just outside Washington, D.C. You're listening to Maritime Nation, the Center for Maritime Strategy's podcast designed to dive deeply into the policy challenges facing America's sea services and the role of the United States as a sea power on the global stage. We aim to provide you with the highest quality analysis on the most pressing maritime security challenges by joining in conversation with key experts and practitioners. Welcome to the third season of Maritime Nation. This season is produced with support from Data Miner is recognized as one of the world's leading AI businesses. The company's clients are the first to know about high-impact events and emerging risks so they can mitigate and manage crises more effectively. Data Miner solutions are relied on 24/7 by hundreds of clients in over 100 countries across 6 continents to help them solve real-world problems. While in uniform, I relied on Data Miner First Alert for situational awareness with ever-expanding public available information space. Now, I'm delighted to be joined today by my good friend and colleague, Admiral Sir Keith Blount. Admiral Sir Keith Edward Blount is NATO's Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Europe, or DSAC-EUR, based in the Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers Europe, or SHAPE, in Mons, Belgium. Ironically, I served there myself as the XA, the Executive Assistant to the Supreme Allied Commander, Jim Stavridis, in 2009. Now, Admiral Blount joined the Royal Navy in 1984. He qualified as a helicopter pilot and instructor before commanding 3 warships, including the helicopter carrier HMS Ocean. She was up in Baltops with me back in 2015. Wonderful ship. His staff appointments have included 3 periods in the Ministry of Defense. He has extensive command experience in the international arena. He led the Iraqi Maritime Task Group during Operation Telich and has been the Chief of Staff to the European Union Naval Force. Based in Bahrain, he was the United Kingdom's Maritime Component Commander and Deputy Commander of the Combined Maritime Forces spanning operations in Iraq and Syria. Between 2015 and 2019, Admiral Blount was the head of the Fleet Air Arm and the officer accountable for the delivery of 2 magnificent aircraft carriers, Queen Elizabeth and Prince of Wales. Most recently, he held the position of Commander of NATO's Allied Maritime Command, encompassing the COVID pandemic and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Admiral Blount has been appointed Officer of the Order of the British Empire, Companion of the Order of Bath, and was knighted in 2023. He was bestowed the Operational Legion of Merit by the President of the United States in 2016. What a great ally and friend. And in 2021, he was awarded an honorary doctorate by the University of Plymouth in the UK. He holds a Master of Arts degree in Defense Studies and International Relations. Admiral Blount, welcome to Maritime Nation, sir.
Hey, Jamie, it's really great to be with you, and thanks for the opportunity. What a great podcast this is.
Well, thank you very much. And Admiral, on a bit more serious note, please let me offer my condolences to the Crown on the loss of a great naval officer and my good friend, Vice Admiral Sir Clive Johnstone. Clive was your predecessor at Marcom, and he'll be sorely missed. He worked right up until the last day that he was with us here on Earth in public service. And, sir, with your permission, I'd like to dedicate this podcast to Clive's memory.
What a very fitting and typical thought from you, Jamie. What a lovely idea. No, we miss Clive, and still in shock at his passing. I mean, quite extraordinary that he was taken from us so early. But a fine human being, fine naval officer. We will remember him.
Thank you very much, sir. Getting into our discussion today, you, Admiral Keith, once gave me a copy of this incredible book. This is the one you gave me. It's called Jackp, and I revere it. It's one of the most popular books on my shelf here at the Navy League in the United States. Everybody walks in and goes, "What's that?" And I'm going to tell my listeners about it. Every podcast we start with a naval term definition from the Naval Terms Dictionary, which I received when I was a plebe at the Naval Academy in 1977. There I go, dating myself. Jackp is kind of similar for the Royal Navy, and I love the book. It's got all the naval terms from the Royal Navy, and you have a much longer history than we do. And today I picked the term Jack, and I want to read a couple of definitions. It's a generic name for all Royal Navy sailors, derived from Jack Tar in the 18th and 19th century. Jack Tar, with his glossy black hat and carefully dressed pigtail, canvas breeches that, like the hairs on his head, were impregnated with high-grade tar, hence Jack Tar. The usual name associated with Jack these days is Jolly Jack, for the cheerful, willing, robust, randy, sharp, and witty individual whose common sense, humor, and insight have made this book possible. There's other names, too. As you get older, Jack Adams, which is a stubborn fool. Jack of the Dust. Jack of the Dust is common between your Navy and my Navy. On submarines, the Jack of the Dust was the night baker. And in the morning when he came out after putting together these marvelous, big, fat, calorie-filled donuts for all the members of the submarine on deployment, he was covered in flour, hence Jack of the Dust. Jack Jones, for slang, which means you're on your own. Jack Strop, an argumentative sailor. No, there's never any of those out there. And Jack the Lad, someone who plays hard socially. So, sir, can you tell us a little bit more about the book? And you give it out quite frequently. You're very generous. And why is that? Over to you.
Well, I just think it's one of those interesting, humorous naval gifts that capture the imagination of all type of folk, really. I mean, giving it to a fellow admiral is a kind of an easy target, so to speak. But I mean, I give this out to ambassadors, politicians, army officers, you name it. It always seems to go down relatively well. It's one of those books you can just dip into and just have a browse through if you've got a couple of moments, and it lifts the load very often in some of its humor. But it was written by a guy called Rick Jolly, who was a well-known, larger-than-life character in the Royal Navy. I flew with him and I was flying helicopters. He was an extraordinary doctor in a tight spot when I was doing search and rescue. This guy would go down on winch wires and perform miracles in bad weather in the administration of medical aid. But he was best known for the role that he played in the Falklands conflict, where he established a field hospital. He was in the rank of surgeon commander then, and he treated in that field hospital a huge number of casualties. And the extraordinary statistic is that no one who entered that hospital alive left it in any other state other than alive. So nobody died in that hospital. So extraordinary medical achievement. And then he went on to continue medicine in the Royal Navy. So a great guy, but full of life. And as you were, just explaining the term Jack, I can imagine Rick Jolly, Doc Jolly, as he was always known as, using the terms freely because he was a real expert in them. He knew pretty much every one of those words, had them on the, had it all on the tip of his tongue. So a great character, no longer with us, I'm afraid, but a huge guy in every sense of the word. So he was the architect of that book.
Wow, that's fantastic. And thank you very much for sharing the background with our listeners. And I bet you the sales of Jackp go way up on Amazon as a result. So you're the first deputy SACEUR in the history of the Alliance to be a naval officer. And I think that's significant. And I also love the fact that you're giving Jackp to Army officers to educate them. If I'm not mistaken, I believe you're the last set of orders in Queen Elizabeth's red suitcase before she passed, which is an incredible honor in and of itself, particularly since you brought the Queen Elizabeth carrier to the forefront. So as a Navy guy, how has your transition been in Mons as the new DSACEUR? And can you share with us the challenges and the differences between the job you're in now, helping the Supreme Allied Commander and kind of keeping the alliance together, and what you did as commander of Maritime Command, MARCOM? Over.
Yeah, of course. And Jamie, I'm just going to correct one thing which I hadn't spotted until you've just said it. But I'm the first Royal Navy DSACEUR. If you go back in time, there have been a couple of German admirals that have actually fulfilled the role back in the day where we used to have two DSACEURs. But I'm the first Royal Navy one, and I'm. And I didn't really until I got out here, but I'm very proud of the fact that I'm the first Royal Navy DSACure, and I'm certainly the first Navy DSACure for quite a while. And the transition has been, on the one hand, it's been really straightforward because I was immersed in NATO when I was the Maritime commander. So a lot of the terminology, you and I were working together at that time, very closely. So I had a great series of mentors around me to help me get to grips with the alliance, because it's quite a complicated place to work.
Oh, yeah.
And you were one of those for sure. So coming into shape on the back of that appointment felt a natural career transition for me. So that bit was kind of the easy bit. And most of the challenges that I'm facing now are really more opportunities than they are challenges, as cliched as that sounds. But I mean, we're doing a lot of work around the new plans that we've written, which are better, more fit for purpose. Plans, command and control is one of the areas that I work directly for SACure on, and again, we've changed quite a bit in that area for the better, and we continue to refine it and adapt it. I do force generation for the alliance, and that again has reaped quite encouraging results, actually, more so than I think that we were predicting. So there's lots of things to be getting on with, and key among them right now is bringing in Sweden and Finland, which is still relatively recent news, a big load of work for sure, and there are some challenges in optimizing what we can get from those two fine nations, but it's mainly opportunity. It's the brilliant opportunities that they bring. But it is quite different being a DCOM to being a commander.
Right.
Even though I'm 4-star now, and of course at a higher rank, but I was the commander when I was in Marcom. So that kind of transition is just, you just have to get used to where you actually fit in the system. And of course, I work in close support of SACure and as the sort of the commander delegate, should God forbid it ever be necessary. And I suppose the other big difference is the strategic level at which I'm now at, rather than the operational level. So right. I actually am beaming into you from the NATO headquarters in Brussels. I'm not in shape, I'm in Brussels. And the reason I'm in Brussels is because I'm often in Brussels. Whereas when I was the Maritime commander, I just didn't need to come here very often. Whereas now I really do, because we're offering military advice, and in many ways we're working either with the MC or through the MC to make sure that the NAC, the North Atlantic Council, have the very best military advice that they can get. So yes, a lot of changes, a lot that's the same, and a lot of opportunities.
Wow. Well, thanks very much for that. And I see the big, beautiful building behind you where you are sitting in Brussels. And for the listeners, that's on a good day, it's about an hour from the SHAPE headquarters in Mons. And the fact that you're spending a lot of time there, I'm sure helps the Supreme Allied Commander. Also, for the listeners of the now 32 nations of NATO, each of them have Chief of Defense on the Military Committee in Brussels, and they also have a permanent representative who is an ambassador to NATO. That is the North Atlantic Council that Admiral Blount was talking about, and they have the power of the purse and the political power to move the alliance forward. So it's extremely important, sir, what you are doing to clarify all the things that are going on, particularly at this time. I mean, we're literally in a phase 1, phase 2, somewhere between this gray area of a potentiality, God forbid, of war in Europe. Having said that, the next question is really kind of 4 parts, but I'll sort of break it up into 2 chunks. One, what do you consider as the top priorities for the NATO alliance today? And how is the naval campaign to secure Europe against Russian aggression, or really the joint campaign to secure Europe against Russian aggression, going for you?
Well, it's a broad question, and to sort of take it in its parts, some of the priorities at the moment around the alliance are around increasing the resilience and the weight, really, of some of our structures. So a good example would be JFC Norfolk, the newest of the Joint Force Commands in Norfolk, Virginia, on the east coast of the USA, of course. So inevitably, when you bring in a new structure like that, you need to kind of build it. And we're building that out. We're building it out quite quickly. But it's a focus of SACEUR, and it's a focus of mine as we work with the nations to make sure that we get the right people into those billets to make that HQ as good as it possibly can be. So that's one of the things we're looking at. I would say we always make sure that we stay ahead of the competition. And I'm always looking for opportunities to open that advantage even further. So getting after things like multi-domain operations, not just as something that we can talk about, but something that we do instinctively day in, day out, and really build the muscle memory through, using that as a tool of the trade. That's another one of the things that we're really focusing on right now. And also using the training and the exercise program to continue to improve us even further than we are at the moment. So the opportunity to make the exercise and training program more and more sophisticated, such that we can identify areas that may need a bit of fine tuning, is one of the things that I'm focusing on. And around all of that is the wrapper of new technology and bringing that onto the books, whether that's kinetic capability or whether it's in and around things like cyber or space, artificial intelligence. All of these things are very topical, very important, and certainly part of my day job. I would say, when it comes to the success of, what we've done, particularly post the 24th of February, 2022, I think in the maritime domain, we've done pretty well. I mean, the overmatch of NATO warships at sea on a daily basis is really quite extraordinary. Just in normal course, we don't really have to try very hard for that to be the case. But the fact that it is, I think, matters because it sends an important message in and of itself. But, we've done a lot of work recently, Jamie, around putting in place some new plans, which I spoke about, but all of that's within a framework called the Concept for Deterrence and Defence of the Euro-Atlantic area. And that provides the joint force commands as well as the domains, so the Navy, the land forces, the air forces, the cyber, the space. It allows all of them far more freedoms to do what they need to do to deliver the effects that SACEUR seeks to deliver across NATO's area of responsibility. So these new freedoms provide an agility that allow us not only to see more mass out and about, but also to be able to use it in the most effective way. So I would say that we've done pretty well. And in other areas apart from the maritime, of course, we've done a lot around air policing and to fill that out and to make sure that we've got that where it needs to be in the numbers that we need. The forward land forces that we've doubled in size and more than doubled in strength in terms of their potential. We've done that. It's all around deterrence and defence. We don't seek to send the wrong messages. We're a defensive alliance, but it's nevertheless important that we send the right signals and the right messages. And I think we're doing that.
No, I think you're doing that too, sir, and doing a very fine job. And I can't foot stomp anymore what you just said. The last comment is that NATO is a defensive alliance, never having the intent of any kind of a land grab or moving outside of its territory. We defend the territory of the 32, and Article 5, an attack on one is an attack on all, is sacrosanct. Couldn't agree with you more on the importance of JFC Norfolk. I think here in America, we're honored to have the new NATO command down there and solidifying this pillar, this side of the transatlantic bridge. And on multi-domain, Bravo, I think the first war game I participated in as a flag officer on multi-domain was Global 13 at the Naval War College back in 2013. And we tried to move from the functional approach of warfare with JFLIC, the land component, JFMIC, the maritime component, and JFAC, the air component, into land, sea, air, space, and cyber. And I have to tell you, it was a soup sandwich, as we'd say in America. It was just kind of a mess. And we've moved on from there, and NATO has embraced that. So that's great. Bravo Zulu. Last part of the question there, I think you've covered gaps and seams, but I think the listeners here, particularly in the U.S., are interested in how is your team at NATO looking at a possible role in the Pacific? Now, you're the guy that brought the Queen Elizabeth to the forefront and that remarkable Strike Group 21 that the QE went around the world with the F-35 embarked with U.S. Marines and their aircraft, the F-35 embarked alongside Royal Navy counterparts. That was spectacular. So are we going to see more of that from the rest of the alliance? Over.
So I think it's a balance. And I think the first point is that no one within NATO believes that you can ignore what goes on outside of the area of responsibility that NATO kind of has. Anybody that would imagine that Russia or any other potential adversary would think, well, I can't fight outside this box because that's the box I've got to stay in. It's fanciful. So the fact that Russia has a big presence in the Indo-Pacific region, as just one example, makes us sit up and take notice. So the relationship that we have within the alliance with those outside of that area of responsibility is really quite central. But we achieve that in a number of different ways. One of the ways is that the larger nations in the alliance with expeditionary capabilities, such as the UK, will take their capability on the road, so to speak, and put it out into the Asia-Pacific region in a modulated way in order to demonstrate that we can do that and that we want to do that. And some of the nations, including the UK, keep a permanent presence out there as well. So that's one of the ways that we would see that continuing. The other one is at the US level, where you will know better than I, the COCOM network is pretty tight. So the relationship between EUCOM, CENTCOM, and PACOM, there's a drumbeat all of its own there, which is an important part. And then it's important to recognize that NATO has established partners that live in that part of the world. So, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, these are close partners of the alliance, and we are in regular dialogue with them. They have national military representatives attached to the alliance, and we sit down with the chiefs of defense of the alliance nations, with the chiefs of defense of those partner nations routinely. So that's another way in which we maintain our connectivity. And we see, as an example, Australian maritime patrol aircraft flying under NATO command and control in alignment with NATO activities, such as Operation Sea Guardian. These are demonstrations of the fact that we can work with each other as well as alongside each other. So there are a number of ways in which we ensure we don't take our eye off the ball with respect to what goes on outside of the AOR. Fantastic.
And you mentioned a couple of things that I want to go back to. First of all, for the listeners, you talked about, Admiral Keith, the relationship between the U.S. combatant commanders. So, PACOM, CENTCOM, EUCOM. And just for the listeners, so everybody knows, a lot of people do, but some may not. The Supreme Allied Commander, currently General Chris Caboli, an Army officer, is also the commander of EUCOM. So he's got one heck of a portfolio, which is very nice to have you there, sir, as one of the most competent officers in inventory to help him out as he travels all over the place. So there is a synergy between NATO and EUCOM. And second, on the partners, I couldn't agree with you more. When I was doing this with Admiral Stavridis, we actually went to Australia and to New Zealand on kind of a recruiting mission and a thank you mission, because the Aussies and the New Zealanders were with us in the International Security and Assistance Force in Afghanistan, and they spilled their blood, for the NATO alliance and in an attempt at peace and establishing democracy. let me move on. During my time at Shape, the DSAC year was the chief force generator. That was one of the toughest jobs that he had. And I note that after the Russian attack on Ukraine in February 22, a lot of force generation took place. So there were a lot of voluntary contributions of ships. We started to see the SNMGs really get pumped up. So is it easier for you as the chief force generator now, or is it just as hard as it was back in 2009 to get assets to put them to sea on the multi-missions number of missions that NATO has? Over to you, sir.
So it's good. It's a good topical question, and the role of the force generator, being synonymous really with what DSAC does, is established in the very first exchange of letters between General Eisenhower and General Montgomery. And I've got that letter in my office, and a central paragraph of a 3-paragraph letter is all about General Montgomery's role in being the force generator for the alliance. And now when I go and I speak to people, I have cut and paste that central paragraph from that letter, and I put it on a PowerPoint slide, and I get people to read it. And then I click the PowerPoint slide, and it comes up with the date and the fact that it was authored by General Eisenhower. So in that sense, that's been an enduring role of the DSAC. And it is a big part of my daily routine now. To answer the question, I think Ukraine has made it easier on balance. I was faced with a unique position, I think, as a recent maritime commander, of having to telephone admirals and ask them not to send ships to sea, because the enthusiasm after the 24th of February was such that we were definitely up for a response in the maritime domain. So we had to kind of attenuate that a little bit so that we didn't send the wrong messages or over-egg the pudding. But it's still true that the standing NATO maritime groups are stronger now than they were before the invasion of Ukraine, and that's good. And I would add to that the freedoms and the flexibilities that Vice Admiral Utley now has to use the maritime force, that's attractive to nations. So they like to give their ships knowing they're going to be given lots of work to do and run around, because they typically get a better ship back than the ship they sent. So all of this is a plus up. And although when I look beyond like next year into some of the more distant areas where we're trying to generate forces, I've got the odd gap that I've got to fill, but equally I think we've got a relationship between Shape and the nations, but more importantly than that, we've got this kind of solidarity across the nations that we need to be in this for as long as it takes. And I think that is impetus in and of itself to make sure that we continue to generate the forces we need. So I think, as much as none of us wanted to see the invasion of Ukraine, of course we didn't. The fact is that it's been a stimulant to make sure that we are ready should ever it be needed.
Well, first of all, that's fantastic. And second of all, I loved your categorization when you said, don't over-egg the pudding. That's a phrase that ought to be in Jack speak. And it's a good problem. It's a good problem to have when you have to call the admirals and tell them, hey, look, I'm full in the SNMGs, so please stay home. And smart ball, because as you know, sir, we've had a tremendous problem in our country with modernization and readiness, because our ships are at sea. We're putting, up to 100 ships at sea every day, and we're burning them out, both people and the platforms. So holding that in reserve and bringing them in for the next tranche as the SNMG comes back and turns over is just a great thing. And so that is a good problem to have. Thank you. If we could, I want to talk about the new term uncrewed systems, particularly in the Black Sea. And I was talking to Admiral Stu Munch, who took my job at NAVUR, and I said, Stu, what do you think of this magnificent performance of the Ukrainians, who lost all their ships early in the war? They didn't have that many, but they have gone back hard at the Russians and pushed the Russians, the Black Sea Fleet, out of Sevastopol to Novorossiysk. I actually had a New York Times reporter write me a note and ask me, "Is that significant?" Oh, yeah, it's very significant. And Stu said, "Well, they've done a great job, but you know, you got to watch what you ask for, because now we have to take the lessons learned and make sure that we can protect our ships." So, is it true that the Russians have lost almost a third of their Black Sea Fleet? And do you think this can be sustained overall? And what's your impression of anti-access area denial? Are you worried about that for NATO navies? Over.
Yeah, so I mean, the Ukrainians have really given the Russian Navy a bit of a hammering up there, in a way that I don't think some would have predicted, particularly, as you say, given the start point, where they lost a very large slice of their Navy through Sevastopol, and then, what was left really in terms of major combatants at the beginning of the conflict for a number of reasons. So from that slightly, from not a great start point, they've really come out of the blocks. And I think what they've done is they've demonstrated huge amounts of ingenuity, innovation. They've been helped a bit along the way as well. But they've also been, of course, equipped and motivated by this absolute sovereign desire to not concede. And they've been quite fabulous in that. So in my last role, I used to occasionally speak with the Ukrainian Navy chief, and he was a resolute individual. For sure. So, we worry about anti-access and area denial because you can't take it for granted, and there are some wicked weapons out there that can catch you cold if you're not ready. But while giving absolute credit to the Ukrainians for using a couple of Neptune missiles to sink the Moskva, as an example,
right.
The Russians should take absolutely zero credit for the way in which they lost the ship, which was very instructive to us about the need to be ready in situations like that. So, we were able to learn Russia's lesson there, or relearn it, remind ourselves of it. So, but it's not just in the use of cruise missiles, and they've used them of various different types, the Neptune being one, and there have been some other, longer range, exquisite missiles that they've been able to use. But in the way in which they've got after this army of drones idea. And for army of drones, think of army not as a land term, but just as a collective term for using drones. And don't think of drones as flying drones. I mean, they're applying this term to any autonomous, uncrewed system that they can use. And they've been brilliant at that. They've been brilliant in that in the uncrewed surface vessel domain and in the underwater domain as well. They've used traditional capabilities like mines very effectively. So yeah, they've really packed a punch in the maritime domain, and for many they've been punching above their weight. But it's not been a single event. They've maintained that level and continue to go after it. So it's really, really impressive. And yeah, we got to take note. A2AD is one of those areas that we study greatly tactically in the defensive systems required to defeat them, or indeed in how to create areas of denial ourselves. So we're alive to it, but there's lots for us to pull apart in this particular war to make sure that we stay way ahead of the game.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks for that commentary, and couldn't agree with you more on what they have created with this, as you put it, the army of drones. There's so much discussion in this country about this in terms of next generation weapon systems, or ones that are being developed right now. Everybody's heard the term replicator coming out of the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Nobody really knows what that is unless you're inside those offices, but it's described as a hellscape of drones to really complicate the enemy's targeting problem and put the enemy's high-value assets at risk. So I think the Ukrainians are writing a book on that for us. But as you point out, they're also writing the book for everybody else that's watching. And all of this stuff is in open source information on the internet. For example, I watched the Russian ship Ivanovitz go down in Lake Donoslav in Crimea, and that was unbelievable. There were videos online from the Russian side as they were shooting small arms and cruise served weapons at these jet skis, but they were overwhelmed by what looked like up to 4 or 5 jet skis that ultimately sunk the ship. And so really sobering for a naval officer to watch that. And thank you for your comments. I want to talk a little bit about money and the fact that I think we're all encouraged by the nation's penchant to increase defense spending, particularly when there's a threat out there, and that is the Russian Federation and other entities that are assisting them. We now have 11 allies, if I'm not mistaken, of the 32 who are at or higher than 2% of GDP for defense spending. Are you encouraged by that? I think the total GDP of all the alliance combined is something like 32 trillion euros. And so I imagine we could spend more, but it's nice to see the allies stepping up to the plate. Any comments on that from you, sir?
Yeah, so I think we'll find it'll be a bit more than that when we get to the. I think we're going to have this year and probably around the summit time about 20 of the nations at 2% or above. So, we've done pretty well when we go back to 2014 and Crimea when we had 4, I think it was. So, we've done well, and at its very basic level, no nation is spending or has a downward trend of spending on defense. Everybody is going in the right direction. And I think we're at probably about the first point since the end of the Cold War that we can say that. In terms of, the principle of fair burden sharing and every nation paying their way in order to contribute to the alliance, I mean, it's a principle that is impossible to argue against. The word, it's all about in the word fair and how that's interpreted. But in terms of, each nation being absolutely committed to the alliance, to the capability the alliance requires, then that is, I think, absolutely baked into what every nation should be thinking. And we're seeing it manifest itself in the fact that everybody's spending a bit more money on defense. Is it enough? Well, it's a bit like, asking an admiral, does he need more ships? I mean, with the exception of me every now and again phoning an admiral up and saying, keep your ships for another day. Right. The general answer to that question is always, yeah, of course we need more ships. So do we need more money? Yeah, of course we need more money. Right. But you're right. I think in the alliance, if you add up the GDP of all of the alliance nations, I mean, it's almost half of global GDP. Right. So, there's a lot of potential in there for sure. Anyway, we'll see. But at the moment, 2% is a floor, not a ceiling. And many nations, your own nation, of course, but others within the alliance, such as Poland and in the Baltics, are now spending way above 2%. So we're starting to see defense becoming one of those topics that is that politically is a comfortable one to discuss. And that's because we're facing a challenge in Europe, which is unprecedented in recent times, and it's a challenge that we need to meet.
Thanks very much for that, and I agree with you 100%. And you can always use more, but I think, if we're at 20 by the time of the summit, that's really a spectacular number, and only 12 to go. You mentioned the Baltics, so I want to shift gears and move up north. We have Baltops 24 going on right now. Man, that makes me feel old because I did Baltops 15 and 16 as a commander just 8-9 years ago. And we have these 2 wonderful new nations that have come aboard the alliance, Sweden and Finland. And certainly that ups the ante for, contribution from their GDP, particularly the Swedes, who are a very rich nation. Some in this country have characterized the Baltic now, with the addition of Sweden and Finland in the NATO alliance, as a NATO lake. Others that I talk to, and I think I subscribe to the alternative view, is it's a little dangerous to kind of brag and say, well, it's NATO's lake, because there is still this place called Kaliningrad, which is part of the Russian Federation, that probably has the highest density of weapons of any square footage of territory on Earth. So how's it going with onboarding Sweden and Finland, and how do you think things are going in the Baltic right now, particularly in light of Baltops?
Yeah, so I mean, I think Sweden and Finland are just extraordinary additions to the alliance, you know, and they're now formally in the club, which is brilliant. But they've not joined a club they knew nothing about. You know, they were both partners of the alliance before that. We're very familiar with working alongside them when they were operating sort of as nation states absent of their membership of the alliance. But now they're inside the tent. It's all goodness from an alliance perspective. They bring extraordinary capability in mass, because, you know, they're quite large militaries, really. I mean, Sweden's got a very, very large air force, as you know. Finland's got a very exciting capability program ahead of it. Sweden's expert in the maritime as well. And because they haven't enjoyed the Article 5 piece of the alliance, they've had to take their own security extraordinarily seriously, and they have done that. They really have done that. It's very impressive, the way in which they we'll have a lot to learn from Sweden and Finland with having them in the alliance. So it is goodness. I agree with you completely. It's a bit lazy to describe the Baltic as a NATO lake, because it's not. It's not exclusively a NATO lake for the reasons that you pointed out. So therefore, and the fact that Kaliningrad is so well defended, is bristling with, with weaponry, it means that we mustn't take anything for granted in the Baltic. We've got to be responsible actors in the Baltic. We've got to do our activity through the lens of being deterrent, not through any optic of trying to provoke or to risk any kind of unwanted escalation. You know, we have to be responsible in the way that we behave, but equally we have a right to exercise and train wherever we are free to do that, and that includes the Baltic, and that's what we're doing at the moment with Baltops. It's an exercise we in the alliance are very, very familiar with. So are the Russians, very, very familiar with Baltops. So we're laying that out, and we're seeing some interest from the Russians, and that's kind of priced in really for the way that the exercise runs. But I would say the addition of Finland and Sweden, you know, more strategically, is a real plus for the alliance. And of course, it does mean now that, you know, without describing the Baltic as a NATO lake, there's a truth in the fact now that we've got the Nordic landmass and the Scandinavian peninsula fully joined up, and that's got to be a good thing, if only in the simplicity of the architecture now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, sir. Sweden, just an incredible powerhouse in terms of an industrial base. I mean, they've got Saab, they've got Kockums. United States, they just brought on one of Task Force 59's Commodores, Mike Berzier, to do kind of an uncrewed systems for Saab. I think they call it Scapa. I saw Mike. He's a good friend a couple of weeks ago. And then on the Finnish side, I spent some time up there before I became Sixth Fleet and Navyur. When I was on the Joint Staff in Washington many, many years ago, I went to Joint Staff talks in Finland. They took us out to Santa Mina Island, which is their Special Operations Training Center, and handed me the new Finnish assault rifle, which is now like 15 years old. And they said, "You want to try it?" And they had a range with pop-up targets. I'm telling you, that weapon was very simple. It was like an AK-47. You get mud in it, it works. And it had a really cool sight, like a laser sight, but it'd make a marksman out of anybody. And everybody is conscripted at some point in their time, and they're all citizen soldiers, and they bring that capability to the alliance, which is absolutely amazing. I also, during Baltops or Trident Juncture, I don't remember which, went out on one of the Finnish, I thought it was a mine countermeasure ship, but it was a training ship and a mine laying ship. And I don't think I'd seen that before. And that was, really interesting, and a capability that now the Alliance can share as well. Well, sir, that brings us to the end. And as with tradition, I always offer my guests the final word. Is there anything you'd like to say to the audience here in America? And thank you very much for being with us today. But over to you. Last word.
Well, thank you, Jamie. Again, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to talk to you. I think the type of work you're doing here, that the podcast is important. I really hope that people listening are able to recognize that we are a defensive alliance. We're very clear in our role, and this is an important time for the alliance to get its to make sure that we get it right. And I think so far we are absolutely where we need to be. We are absolutely resolute. The unity around the alliance nations is extraordinarily strong. And we will be keeping going as we are going for as long as it takes. With respect to listeners in the US, well, your magnificent nation is, of course, the strongest player within the alliance. And I would just want you to know how grateful we are for that support, the friendship we get. It radiates strongly. And we are grateful for it. So thank you. And thank you, Jamie, for your personal interest in all of this, and the fact that I know you took your uniform off a short while ago, but you never really did. You're still absolutely hard charging. And that's got to be a good thing for all of us. So thank you, my friend.
Well, thank you, sir. And it's been wonderful having you on the podcast today. And folks, listeners, that's a wrap. Thank you to Admiral Keith Blount, DSAC here, for joining the Maritime Nation. I also want to thank our listeners for joining us each month. If you have not heard our previous episodes, you can always catch up on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Episodes and all content described here today can be found on our website, www.centerformaritimestrategy.org, all lowercase. Thanks to our sound engineer, James Peterson, for connecting us across the transatlantic bridge today. And thanks to Data Miner for their sponsorship and support. Stay tuned for the next episode of Maritime Nation.